Welcome once again to Sid Caudle, Christian People's Alliance. And Sid, today we are going to stretch the whole world. We're going to start over the pond and we're going to get very deep very shortly. But I'll tell you what, the first thing that occurs to me that is a perennial thing, really, in the tax system of many countries is appalling, complicated, costly, and especially the United Kingdom. And the States, Mr. Trump, is dealing with it from his point of view. Nowhere near as complicated as ours. But he said, look at the money being spent here on accountants, goodness knows what. A lot of it is unnecessary. The accountants love it, of course, and the lawyers. Can we not get a simpler system? Well, of course we can. Other countries have done it. They've done it by amalgamating taxes. Why should we pay for a council tax, then national insurance, then income tax, then capital gains, then inheritance? It goes on and on and on. And Rachel's going to have a good time, isn't she, tomorrow?
Well, as I've said before, I believe that the issue isn't the tax system. I believe the issue is spending. And in America, they've got all these non-governmental organizations. But what Trump has done is set up this Department for Government Efficiency and is looking across the board to make government more efficient. And that is absolutely the right approach. But in this country, we've gone the other way. Since Keir Starmer's come in, he set up 28 new quangos and increased spending on them by at least 88 billion. And that's on top of the 100 billion increased spending by the Conservatives over the 14 years. Now, I've been looking at this in more detail, and I'm coming to the conclusion that the 353 billion that we're now spending on quangos. I mean, the Taxpayers Alliance actually said the figure's 391 billion. Interestingly enough, but I think we can easily save 200 billion immediately. And when you think that the rise in national insurance that we were complaining about was 25 billion, and the total that we get from council tax, which you mentioned, is somewhere in the region of 15 billion. I mean, the 200 billion saving that we could make immediately dwarfs those taxes. I mean, we could actually just get rid of all those taxes completely. Or sorry, in the way of national insurance, just go back to what it was before. But we can make substantial savings provided we reduce spending. And to me, that's absolutely the right approach. And I think we could probably save more than 200 billion. And the way we would do it is simply by freezing all regulations immediately, saying there'll be no change in regulations for the next 5 years. And then we'll also have a review review panel that will have the power to get rid of any regulations that we feel need to be got rid of. What we won't do is ask the civil service to do a review of regulations, because if you ask the civil service to do a review of regulations, they'll immediately appoint somebody on a massive salary to head up the review. They'll then set up a massive bureaucracy alongside the person who's going to head up the review, and the whole thing will take years. And at the end of the review, they'll probably come back and say, well, there's very few regulations that we can get rid of, or they're all needed. And the whole thing will be an utter waste of time. So we've got to go down a different path. And the path to go down is freezing regulations and having a review panel that can just has the power to delete regulations that aren't wanted. That's the way to do it. And also, by the way, you've also got to get rid of net zero completely, because 7 of the new quangos that Labour have set up are all environment quangos. So we just get rid of all the environment quangos, get rid of the green levy. So you can do that very, very quickly. And if you do, that's the way you can save money quickly when you come into power, which is what is necessary.
Yes, indeed, it is. And I'm going to mention a name that goes back a couple of weeks, actually, but he keeps coming back, Robert Jenrick, and him of the famous saying, whilst in Birmingham, I didn't see a white face. He's been called all the names under the sun, but he's been proved right. In certain parts of Birmingham, it is particularly difficult. But he's come up with a solution, Sid. Let's see if you agree with this. We want the truth out of politicians, not lies and obfuscation. The first thing is he wants to stop sectarian MPs. Now, by that, he means Islamic MPs that are clearly out to promote Islam in all sorts of ways, whether it be against the Jewish side of the population, as in Aston Villa, part of Birmingham, or other throughout the country. In actual fact, there are many MPs that are Muslims and that are causing great difficulties, whether it's flying the flag, whether it's celebrating Christmas. It's clear for anybody to see they are sectarianists, and he wants to stop it. Good luck to him on that one. Next is that he wants to deal with militant imams. Now, we've been sent so much evidence on this by videos of imams clearly calling out caliphate and physical violence, even some of them, in their pursuit of this aim. And they do it week after week, and they get away with it, Sid. You can be blooming sure if that was a Christian preacher in a pulpit, he would be sat on immediately. So that's the next one. The third one, he wants to turn things back 30 years because that's when mass immigration really started getting out of hand. And of course, there are many of his genre that want to send people back. If you're here illegally, you should go back, and that's following Trump again. The other thing he finally said was, let's get rid of the woke chief of police, whichever region they are in, because they are causing havoc. Now, that's a big, long question, Sid. Would you generally agree with what his sentiments are?
Well, yes and no. There's two of them that overlap. So the first one that you said was stopping sectarian MPs. No, I don't agree with that because you see, basically, people can vote for who they want to vote for, and several of the sectarian MPs actually stood as members of parliament, stood as independents. And if you stand as an independent, then everyone's got every right to stand as an independent. And you can't say, oh, we don't want this person to stand as an independent because they get too many votes. The only issue is whether some of these people have actually fiddled the system, where they've actually used vote rigging. That is an issue because Muslims don't believe in democracy. It's not, if you go to a Muslim country, generally speaking, there's no democracy there. It's often said that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East because they don't believe in democracy. It's not part of the Quran. It's not part of Islamic belief. They use democracy in order to gain power. So they've got no problem whatsoever in rigging an election. So that's something which should be addressed, but not a right to stand. Absolutely, everyone's got the right to stand as an independent. Secondly, there's this issue you said about imams, which actually does overlap with what you also said about the police, because we just recently, in this last week, we've had the case of Sean O'Sullivan, who was arrested because he said, "We love Jews." And a policewoman said, "Oh, that can be offensive to Muslims, saying that you love Jews. So I'm sorry, you can't say it." And of course, being a street preacher, he said, "Well, why shouldn't I say it?" And it's quite interesting. See, I heard someone say, "Oh, well, but that can be cause alarm among Muslims." But at the end of the day, this was a street preacher standing still. He wasn't threatening anybody. And anybody could walk away if they didn't like what he was saying. I mean, the idea that somehow I'm threatened by what this man was saying, so I had to stand there and listen to him. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, so the whole thing was utter nonsense. But you see, it's very interesting that the police target a Christian for offending a Muslim, but they never target a Muslim for offending a Christian. And they never target a Muslim imam who's actually advocating violence in the mosque. And, that is what is wrong. It's blatantly biased policing. So the two go together, I'm afraid, dealing with the chief of police and dealing with imams. Because, as I say, we don't need new laws. There's no new law that we need. All we need is existing laws applied fairly by the police. So this is something which has absolutely got to be looked at. It's interesting that the Labour Party have decided that they want to get rid of police commissioners, because I mean some of the police commissioners are pursuing woke policies, but not all. Some of them are conservatives or even reform and are pursuing different policies from what the Labour Party want. So they're actually wanting the police to target these imams, some of these police commissioners, and the Labour Party say, oh, we don't like that, so we'll get rid of the commissioners. I mean, that's the way the Labour Party are reacting, you see, and that itself is wrong. No, I mean, if we have a new reform government, one of the things that they must do is basically tell all the chief of police across the country that they've got to apply the law fairly. And that means anyone advocating violence, wherever they advocate it, should be arrested and charged with advocating violence. And that will certainly apply to many imams.
Right. Now, lots of people are agreeing with him. There's talk about him jumping ship to reform, talk about many people doing that, but reform are in a very commanding position, but it seems to have gone very quiet at the moment. Certainly, Labour is very worried about the situation, and every time they attack reform as number one. Yes, facts are important in this. The timing is always difficult. Nigel Farage believes in 2 years this government will have gone. Time will tell on that one. But Nigel's really got to get things sorted out, I would suggest, Sid, because has he got the number of MPs, people with gravitas on his side yet? What's he hoping for? People jumping ship?
Well, I think, that they've got, yes, with Nigel Farage, Richard Tice, Lee Anderson, Danny Kruger. I mean, these people are very strong and, will be able to lead a new government. Now, they're going to have to obviously bring other people in alongside because those four aren't enough. But you can, if you've got at the core of your party people who are able to take a strong position and take a leadership, then that's what really matters. And I think they have got it in place. But I don't yet think they've got the policies in place, because they've got to get a very strong manifesto in place that literally, when they get into government, they can say, this is our manifesto, this is what we're going to implement. Now, we are talking to at least one of those people I've mentioned behind the scenes and talking about them looking at our policies. And because I believe our manifesto is way stronger than theirs. I've already talked about Quangos, which, you see, reform need to take all this on board. You see, instead of taking this on board, which, as I've talked about, Nigel Farage has come out and said, I don't think we'll be able to reduce taxes when we come into power because there won't be enough money. Now, that shows that they've not thought through what they're doing. If they thought through what they're doing, they would be adopting our policies, and they know there's plenty of money to reduce taxes, and they know where they can get it from. So they've got to get the manifesto in place. It's the same with the NHS. You see, they've come up with this idea of maybe possibly introducing private health, and private health has a greater role, and possibly dismantling the NHS. But of course, the Labour Party have actually gone for them on that, and they've not thought through what they're doing. You see, our policy of going back to GP fund holding, which worked in the 1990s, will guarantee everyone can get GP appointments because we know it works with GP fund holding, and will relieve the hospitals enormously because a lot of people will be treated by their GPs as they should be, rather than flooding into accident and emergency, which is happening at the moment. So we've got a policy to deal with the problem. Reform haven't at the moment. They're just putting forward vague ideas. They've got to move from putting forward vague ideas to having very clear, very precise policies and be ready for government. That's important. And I hope that they'll listen to us and talk to us behind the scenes, and we can have a real input into their policies.
Well, you heard it here first. Let's hope something does happen. Sid, the doom mongers in all this, the people that want to go back into Europe are doom mongering. Look at the state we're in. We've paid or agreed to pay £50 billion back over a number of years to get out. We're paying another £5 billion this year. And they're saying, oh, look, it's been a disaster. Trade's not going as we wished it would go. Well, it's going to be difficult because, believe you me, we hear, see, and feel the feeling over here about Brexit. They don't like it. The Spanish have always been particular pro-EU, and I'm not surprised they got a fortune from Brussels for infrastructure in particular, and lots of other things. So they're very anti-British, even though we are giving them a fortune in tourism. But there we are, that's how it is. And they will do anything to make it difficult. You try and get anybody to send you a Christmas present here, you pay a fortune for it. And we're at the stage now, don't please send any Christmas presents. It'll cost a fortune. It's stopped at the frontier and they put all these taxes on and it's hopeless. One dear friend sent a lovely big bar of chocolate, which probably costs about £3 or £4 as a Christmas gift. I got to pay £10 and go to the aduana, the frontier, pick it up. I mean, it's just difficult in Spain. People perhaps don't realise this. So they make it difficult. And then you stop and think, well, hang on, how much were we paying while we were in the EU contributing to the Central Governance Fund? It was a fortune. They never mentioned that. We're well quids in with all the difficulties.
Yes, so I mean, the net contributions were 10 billion a year. That's what it was costing us to be in the EU. And it's quite interesting to see some countries like Poland or Hungary, might well think, we no longer want to be part of this European Union, but they're not in the same position. See, it's interesting. The other very big net contributor is Germany, and Germany are contributing much more to us. And you look at the German economy, I mean, they completely flatlined, 0% growth. They've even had minus. They've even been in recession. France is only about 0.9% per annum growth, less than the United Kingdom. This, frankly, is what makes the whole idea of, it's been a disastrous leaving the EU, we'd have been much better off, and this is what all our economic problems are caused by leaving the EU. Oh, well, okay, so if we've been in the EU, then the countries in the EU are growing much faster than we are, they? No, they're not. They're doing worse than we are. So the evidence for us having been better off if we'd stayed in the EU is non-existent. You see, the truth is that while we were in the EU, we had a massive trade deficit with the rest of the EU. That's the truth. And we haven't dealt with that trade deficit because of the withdrawal agreement. You see, we entered into a withdrawal agreement which effectively locked in that deficit. See, what we should have done is just left the EU with no agreement. Then we could have imposed tariffs on the EU for their goods. And if the EU had imposed tariffs on us, it wouldn't have mattered because we were exporting far less to them than they were exporting to us. 91 billion, I believe, was the last deficit that I saw with the EU. So we'd have gained hand over fist by having no agreement and imposing tariffs. And of course, we'd have had a much better position with Northern Ireland. I mean, all the problems we've had with Northern Ireland are caused by the withdrawal agreement. And we wouldn't have had all these ridiculous committees which they've set up as part of the withdrawal agreement, which we've got no say over ultimately, because ultimately the EU decides what goes on in these committees. And you see, and it's just, see, we were presented with a situation of, politicians were saying, we must have an agreement, we must have an agreement, it'll be disaster if we don't have an agreement. Well, the reality is that we've traded with the United States for years, and the EU's traded with the United States for years. And we've had over 250 billion of trade with the United States with no agreement. The EU's got no trade agreement with the United States now. You don't need a trade agreement to trade. But of course, if you've got no agreement, then tariffs can be imposed, which is what Trump is doing now. But he's only imposing tariffs on the EU because the US has got a massive trade deficit with the EU. Yeah, but the reality is the EU has a massive trade surplus with the United States. So it's in the United States' interest to impose tariffs on the EU. We don't have a big trade deficit with the United States. In fact, we have a small surplus. So it's not in the interest of the United States to impose a big tariffs on the United Kingdom. I mean, we can happily just carry on trading with no tariffs. And if the United States does impose trade tariffs on us, it could actually be to their disadvantage because they could lose out by it. That's the reality. But you see, if you allow countries to impose tariffs, then it will bring trade into equilibrium. And you see, and what's actually happened over the last 15, 20 years is that the United States, really across the world, has just developed bigger and bigger trade deficits. Because the reason basically being that the taxes in the United States on companies, not on individuals, but on companies, has been higher. I mean, their corporation tax has been very high. So because it's been a lot higher than many other countries, then a lot of American companies have gone to Mexico and have gone to China in order to produce their goods. Now, because Trump has imposed these tariffs, that process has stopped. He's now got business coming back into the United States. But large companies are no longer putting their manufacturing in Mexico because of Trump's tariffs. It doesn't pay them to do it. So you see, he's bringing the trade back into equilibrium by doing that. And we should be doing the same, frankly. I mean, it's in our interest to scrap the EU deal in its entirety and just start again with no deal.
Legally, can we do that?
Well, we'd have to look at it. I mean, you see, we had a situation with the fishing where the fishing deal actually ran out. But it's the Labour Party, instead of actually saying, great, the fishing deal's run out, we'll now continue with no deal, and we've got a right to assert our international agreement to have a 200-mile fishing limit or halfway to the nearest countries. That's what the international agreement is. It's in our interest to have the international agreement and to reassert our fishing rights. Instead of doing that, they said, oh, we'll continue the previous deal, which gives the EU right to fish within British waters. We'll continue that for another 12 years. I mean, what a total and utter disaster. I mean, there may well be international agreements that we have to abide by, and there may be binding treaties that we have to agree to. But normally within those treaties, there is some sort of notice period. So we should be able to give some sort of notice period to say that we want to terminate the treaty. So we've got to look at it. It may well not be possible just on day one to say we're going to abandon the EU withdrawal agreement completely and we're just going to start again. But we can look at it and then look at it in great detail and see what we can withdraw from and what we can't and what we can give notice to and start again. That's what we actually need to do. And that will then bring us into parity with the EU and make the UK far more prosperous and mean we can properly benefit from Brexit, which we haven't so far. But the idea that Brexit has been a total disaster is frankly false.
Yeah. And while we're disbanding organisations, let's turn our attention to the UN, who have been led by really Dharma-like left-wing leadership for many years. Will it change? I doubt it. Their latest edict, which is about to come out, is about CO2. Never mind that you're going to die because of lack of photosynthesis, lack of oxygen. When we reach 150 parts per million, We're down to about 250 at the moment. We've got to get rid, it's the usual argument of CO2. They're having a real go at shipping. Now, this is about to hit the fan, and my goodness me, there are problems with shipping because it's not ordinary fuel that these big super beasts use. It's very gungy, thick, sulfur-laden fuel. It just suits their big engines and, of course, on cost as well. But let me tell you, and we've experienced this ourselves, when these things come into port and they leave their engines going, it affects the climate. We often, or have been, up Southampton water boating, and you will see suddenly clouds over Southampton because they've got a big refinery there opposite city of Southampton called Fawley. That mixed with the boats, and there's lots of big ones. It's sort of doom and gloom quite often. So there is a point in this, but why make this mandatory for the whole world? And the simple thing is you can use scrubbers to get rid of the nasties on boats, or 90% of them. But no, they've got to make a point. We're all going to die of CO2 poisoning. Sid, there's no sense in all this. And that coupled with other things like promoting abortion, promoting homosexuality, promoting lots of things that most countries don't agree with. It's reached the end of its time, Sid.
Yes, I mean, I totally agree with you on the United Nations, but if we can just look at this thing about what you mentioned about sulfur, you see, sulfur is a pollutant, and sulfur does cause harm and damage. And in the past, way back in the 1950s, 1960s, when most people had coal fires in their houses in order to heat their houses, and there was smoke coming from most chimneys, because in order to heat the houses in those days, we had a major problem with sulfur. We had smogs, and it was sulfur that caused the smogs. We then had the Clean Air Acts, which came in, which stopped people burning fuel. We then moved, by and large, to gas central heating in most houses, and the smogs disappeared. We no longer have smogs, but the problem was sulfur. And if you got large tankers that are producing sulfur, and they've got sulfur clouds over ports, as you say, as a result, then absolutely that is a contaminant and needs to be sorted out and needs to be cleared up. Carbon is not a problem. And this whole thing about CO2 emissions and net zero is all complete rubbish, because carbon is not a pollutant. Carbon is part of the atmosphere and necessary for growth. And we actually benefit from increased carbon, believe it or not, because they're actually saying that the satellites that have gone up, that have taken images of the Earth, it's actually getting significantly greener, and we're now able to produce significantly more food because of increased carbon in the atmosphere. So this whole thing about getting rid of carbon is just absolutely complete nonsense. It's a total hoax. That's the reality of it. And the other things that you mentioned about the United Nations of promoting same-sex marriage and promoting abortion is absolutely total nonsense. And we've also had a massive problem as well with the United Nations effectively promoting Hamas. I mean, in Gaza, the United Nations has been employing many Hamas operatives, and Israel's produced the proof. They've proven that a large number of Hamas operatives that actually invaded Israel on October the 7th, 2023, were employed by the United Nations. And the United Nations has not been willing to do anything about it. They've not said, oh, how terrible. We must get rid of these people. We must clean out the organization. No, they've just said, oh, we don't accept your evidence. That's about as far as they've got to. I mean, they're trying to just make out that Israel's lying, even though they've produced the evidence. You see, that's how corrupt the United Nations is, and how much we need to say, sorry, we're reducing our payments, which is what Trump has done. I don't think the right approach is to say we're going to withdraw completely, but I think the right approach is to say, sorry, we're not funding this anymore.
Interesting. I can think of the reply as well. Another difficulty, Sid, that's coming out, maybe for Farage, Caerphilly, which we've discussed before, they narrowly missed out there. There's been a local election north of the border of a similar ilk, and Farage lost on about the fifth count again. Marginal, but the analysis of all this is that now there are problems, obviously, with the Principality and with Scotland. Their politics are quite different from England, indeed Northern Ireland as well. But extracting and filtering the information, it appears that the Gen Z ladies, if we can call them that, are the problem if you're Farage and co. They're the ones that like the Green movement, I suppose, which is the other problem for Farage. But the ladies of the Jet Set particular vote are now deciding, oh, Farage is not the man. Difficult, this, isn't it?
Well, we are going to have the Scottish and Welsh elections next year, and they are gearing up for that. And both those principalities now are going to have elections based on proportional representation. So whatever happens, the reform will have a lot of seats in the Scottish and the Welsh parliaments. They're very unlikely to be running them unless the Conservatives also do phenomenally well, which looks unlikely at the moment, and they might join with reform. But I don't think anybody else is going to join with reform in government. So it's most likely that Scottish nationalists with Labour and in Scotland, and probably Welsh nationalists with Labour in Wales will probably continue running the show. But we'll have to wait and see. But I certainly think Reform will do well in those elections. But again, they need to have clear manifestos and they need to have clear leadership. One of their problems is they haven't even got a leader in Wales at the moment because their previous leader, I believe, was actually arrested and charged with some crime. So they need to get that sorted out quickly and get proper leadership and proper and strong manifestos. And that's what will actually lead to Reform gaining more support. As far as the Greens are concerned, you see, one of the things about the Greens is that they've been supporting Hamas in Gaza. And because the BBC has also been supporting Hamas in Gaza and opposing everything that Israel does, as well as Sky News and ITN and a lot of these organizations, that's why a lot of Gen Z that just believe the BBC and think everything the BBC says is truth, understandably anti-Israel and supporting Hamas. But in time, they will see the truth because you can only hide the truth for so long. And we've already had, some evidence that's come out now, which has shown that where Israel has withdrawn in Gaza and Hamas have retaken control, they've just been killing all the Klansmen and just lining them up and shooting them. And the people that are saying, oh, we must have a ceasefire, Israel go away, just let Hamas run Gaza, are actually now seeing what it's like when Hamas just run Gaza. They're not a wonderful organization. They are basically Islamic terrorists. That's the reality of it. And I believe in time they will see the reality, and then they'll see they're on the wrong side, and they'll see the Greens are on totally the wrong side, frankly. I mean, in my view, the Greens at the moment are a complete disaster. I mean, the climate hoax has been proved to be false, and so they're wrong on that. And Hamas have just proved to be complete thugs where they're taking power, and they're completely wrong on that. So the fundamental things they're standing for, they're wrong. That's the reality.
Yeah, 4 million people out at work that should be in work. 85% of them are claiming mental stress of one part or another. And it's the over 55s, in other words, those about to retire, the lion's share of this. And the government have got to get a grip. But thanks to the backbenchers, it is unlikely to happen. We're in a mess with this, Sid. I don't know another nation with figures anywhere near this. And this is benefit Britain, which is why we're getting everybody wanting to come over here. You can't blame them. I don't know any private company that would exist with the philosophy of the civil servants. Now, during COVID, of course, all interviews, all filters were through Zoom. And that's carrying on when they want to see who's a genuine claimant. There's no face-to-face with most people. And it's easier to tick the box saying, oh, yeah, okay, we'll give you the benefit. There's some awful things coming out about the civil servants, terrible things that are about to hit the public eye. One is, of course, their gold-plated pensions. Now, the average pension pot is just over 100,000 for the normal mortal. Now, in the past, of course, it's always been the privilege because they were paid slightly lower, a civil servant, than somebody in industry, that they got it at the end of their working life in the form of a decent pension. But now, wow, you've got pension pots in average over £1 million, Sid. You've got the leaders of the civil service with pension pots nearly £3 million. And that gives you a pension of well over £100,000 a year. It's playing into the socialist government hands. They love it. They're now getting far bigger pay rises than the private sector, far better pensions. They're clamoring to do a 3-day week. Whether they do actually that as it stands at the moment in real time, who knows? They've got to be sorted out. But of course, it's in the government to preserve the votes which it gets from that class of elite civil servant and a normal civil servant. It's not just the elites. Who's got the courage to take this on? Nigel?
Well, I don't know. At the moment, he's not got the policies in place to do it, but he needs to put the policies in place to do it. But you're absolutely right. We need a massive overhaul of the civil service, and we need to start, as I've already said, with the Quangos, because I mean, basically, what the Quangos are doing is running things alongside the civil service, and the civil service is in their interests to increase the Quangos, which they have done absolutely massively. So we've got to deal with them, and then we've got to get to grips with the civil service departments. You see, the thing is, because of new technology, including AI, we actually need a far less people to run government. Government can be run far more easily and simply, and can be streamlined than it is at the moment. There's no question about that. And there's procurement can be put in place to computerize government departments, and then when we do that, we can just get rid of large numbers of civil servants. That's what we ought to be doing. But what actually tends to happen is that they computerize a government department and streamline it and make it more effective, and then they find new work for the civil servants. Instead of actually sacking them, they find new work for them, and a lot of the new work they find is completely unnecessary, frankly. It's just reviewing this regulation or reviewing that regulation, or and you just think, we don't need to be doing that. We need to stop doing that. That's why the right approach for a new government is to say, we're just going to stop that function completely. We're going to get rid of that function. We're going to make you redundant. We're going to make all these Quangos redundant. Everyone working for them, we're going to make redundant. And instead of people running the civil service, what we need to do is to have people constructing things. So we've actually said the first thing we need to do is to build a new airport in the Thames Estuary for London, to be a massive new hub airport for London, 6 runways, new run HS2 to the new airport, run the Elizabeth line to the new airport, run roads to the new airport that we need, and also run the trains to the Channel Tunnel, so you can get from the new airport to Paris or to Brussels easily, and possibly also to Bonn if they can run the trains over there. Have the new airport. They'll just have trains run fast to all these capital cities in Europe, and that will bring enormous amount of wealth to the UK by doing that, and that's what you want. And we also need to be spending money constructing new industries, construct new car industry in Britain, and we don't need government doing all the construction, but we can have government supporting it and giving grants to encourage the building of new industry. And that's what we need to do. That's what will create wealth. And as we create the wealth, we can reduce the taxes and everyone will be more prosperous. We're not going to be more prosperous by having 28 new quangos and employing enormous number of extra civil servants. All that happens is that running government is now 45% of all spending, where under Margaret Thatcher it was 33%. So we've gone completely in the wrong direction. And you see, because of the new technology, it should have been completely the opposite. The government should be having a lower and lower percentage of total wealth. Instead of that, it's going higher and higher. So we're going completely in the wrong direction. So we've got to have the policies in place from day one of a new government to reduce the percentage of money that the civil servants are taking and reduce the number of civil servants employed and transfer the money to construction. That's the reality.
Interesting. Sid, we've got to move on to the final section, of course, which is 40 plus. And my goodness me, have we got things happening at the moment? We've had some very strange results in the Premier League. People are hitting the buffers, like Liverpool, Manchester United last night. And if Amorim still stays there a week longer, United deserve the demise they're going to get. And even Gallagher, a Liverpool fame, as a pundit said, I can't understand why you've got a person here that will not change his modus operandi. Why play 5 at the back when you're playing a 10-man team and want to pull back a goal? And he won't change. He will never change. And nice to hear some common sense from a pundit. And I'm going to come on to another pundit at the moment. Have a bite at that one, though.
Well, I have to say, David Moyes has done very well for Everton because, last season, Everton were really struggling. And when he came in, he changed the whole atmosphere of the club. And suddenly they're now pushing up towards the top of the table rather than running away from relegation. And it's interesting that yesterday you had this fight between 2 Everton players that caused one of them to be sent off. And what's really funny is that David Moyes is actually saying, I like it. I like them fighting. It shows they've got passion. And Amorim is actually saying, I'd like some Man United players to be fighting a little bit more, so that they've got a bit more passion about what's going on.
Well, I thought that was rich. Honestly, he said it's his fault that they're not fighting more. So he's blaming the team. He wants a decent captain that is prepared to be flexible. And when you get the flexibility of the team being stymied, we have to play 5 at the back.
Yeah.
You're not going to get anywhere.
No, that's right. Well, yeah, but see, equally, it's passion in the team is important. And sometimes, obviously, these players have paid enormous amounts of money, and it can be easy for them just to sit on their wonderful contracts and not really show passion for the team. You see, you talked earlier about Liverpool, and I've got a lot of reservations about Isak. You see, I think Isak did brilliantly for Newcastle. He played superbly, but he's now got this new contract with Liverpool. The way he left Newcastle was very nasty. He showed he got a really real bad attitude, and he's now come to Liverpool. We're now into the 18th game of the season. He hasn't scored yet, and he's cost 140 million. And because he's got a bad attitude, this seems to have rubbed off on Salah, who now seems to have a bad attitude. He seems to say, I want to leave. I've had enough of playing for Liverpool. So when you've got players with a bad attitude, it can rub off on the whole team. And then the whole team ceases to perform. And I think this is what's happening with Liverpool, unfortunately. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. You see, a contrast with that is Eze. You see, Eze has showed he got a very good attitude with the way he left Crystal Palace, because he was willing just to carry on playing for Crystal Palace as long as was needed. He didn't want to sign a new contract, so Crystal Palace needed to sell him because he wasn't going to sell a new contract. And he was going to move to Spurs, but then at the last minute, Arsenal came in for him, and Arsenal was his boyhood club, and said, "Yeah, I'd rather play for Arsenal." And he's come in. He wasn't an automatic player when he arrived at the team. He was like he's behind players like Martin Odegaard and Havertz and these who were established in the team, playing extremely well. There was no guarantee he was going to get into the first team at all. But it just so happens that Havertz has been injured, Odegaard has been injured, Eze has had his chance, and he's come in and he's scored a hat-trick against Spurs. But he's come in with a really good attitude. It doesn't matter, if I play or I don't play. I'm here to do my best. I'm here to fight for the opportunity. And because he's come in with a good attitude, he's being celebrated, and he's now an absolute hero in Arsenal. And because the whole team, frankly, they're all pulling for each other. They've all got a good attitude. Arsenal are likely to win the title this year, and good luck to them, frankly. I hope they succeed.
There you go. From football to another sport. And I'm going to quote you. This is the pundit of all pundits, of course. It's about cricket. I cannot take this stupid England team seriously. And basically, Sir Geoffrey Boycott has hit it on the head there. Money again, being responsible for the bad in football and the bad in cricket. They're making a fortune playing this wretched name, Bazball. You play that without a brain in your head. And England are still doing it. It's all right for them to make a fortune in the IPL, of course, in India, and in the many short forms of the game. I quite liked some of the short forms of the game. But it's got out of hand, Sid. We've not got the calibre. We've got entitlement of the English team in shovel loads over there in Australia. There's got to be a revolution, else we're going to come back once more, tails between our legs, and the Aussies are applying test match thinking, rules, way of playing, and not stupid Bazball.
Well, yes. I mean, in this last test, the first innings was very interesting. Obviously, England didn't get a lot of runs. Then Australia got even fewer runs. So England bowlers did really well. But when England came in for their second innings, obviously they'd now got loads of time because there was still 4 days left, and England were coming in for their second innings. They should have started doing some boycott batting. Boycott batting generally is boring, frankly, because you just stand there and just push the ball away and not score any runs for hour after hour. But so it was quite boring watching boycott playing. But that was the sort of player that they needed in the second innings, the first innings having gone the way it did. But the fact that they decided to continue just to hit out, despite the game situation, was frankly foolish. And then, of course, Australia came in and showed them how to do it. because it's like we've got loads of time, so we don't need to hurry. We don't need we're not 20 overs or 50 overs. We've got probably 200 overs still left in the game, so we can just take as long as we like, and we got plenty of time. So, and then of course they then knock the runs off very easily with only losing 2 wickets. And yeah, England's second innings was a complete disaster, and that, I mean, they must know it was a disaster now, but they've got to be able to adapt.
Yes, adapting, keeping an open mind. That's what we're trying to do on this program, Sid. Thank you for words of wisdom, both sporting and political. We'll see you very shortly.
Okay, cheers.